And if you're trying to win, I say you've already lost. Like this is a tip,
Yeah.
right? Because if you're like, I'm going to convince them they're wrong, but they're
Mhm.
coming with the same motivation, right? And no one's ever like, holy shit, that, you said it so smart that I'm going to give it my view on abortion
Mhm.
and immigration, right? Like, wow, you nailed it with that factoid from Fox News
Mhm.
or NPR. And so if you're not expecting to change your beliefs, then like, why should you
Yeah.
expect someone else to?
Yep. Mhm.
All right. I'm Laura Forcum, president of the Independent Center and a former marketing professor.
I'm Lauren Hall, professor of political science and author of the Substack, The Radical Moderate's Guide to Life.
This is We Made This Political, a podcast about making politics more about flourishing and less about power.
We talk about living together in families, communities, and as citizens, drawing from our backgrounds in psychology and political science, and as parents.
Hi, everyone. This is We Made This Political, and we're really excited to be here today with Kurt Gray, the author of Outrage. And we're going to have an amazing conversation where he's going to tell us exactly how to handle all of the Thanksgiving drama that is likely to come your way next week. So that's the promise, Kurt. Hopefully you can live up to it.
I'm here for it.
Awesome. So Laura, why don't you get us started with a bio and kick us off? Yeah, so we're really excited to be joined by Kurt Gray. Kurt holds an endowed chair in the psychology department at Ohio State University. He also directs the Deepest Beliefs Lab and the Center for the Science of Moral Understanding. He is the author of 2 books. The most recent is Outraged. Get your copy. I have my copy, and also the author of The Mind Club, which we don't even have time. That'll have to be a different podcast. But Kurt's work is very important. It examines moral conviction and things like political tribalism and how we can actually talk about divide. So you're here just in time, Kurt. Thank you for for coming to tell us how to not be outraged at Thanksgiving, because I think everybody's like preemptively expecting that emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to be here. And happy to answer all the questions you got about how to be a little calmer this holiday season.
Yeah, so throw your questions in the chat, absolutely, if you have them. But just to get us started, can you tell us why do you think that political conversations with family are more loaded than they are with like friends or colleagues, and why that might be?
They are, I just gave a book talk at the University of Chicago last week, and Thanksgiving was on everyone's mind.
Mhm.
And I often talk about how to have conversations with strangers, which on one hand feels hard because these are people you don't know, but they're also people with whom you don't have a history of bugging you and pushing your buttons. And so an offhand comment from a stranger is just an offhand comment, but an offhand comment from a sibling or a parent is, there's 4 years of my right of history. And you're like,
Mhm.
you didn't mean that, or right, you mean something else. So it is hard. It is hard to kind of have grace with your family members. And I was actually talking to Nick Epley, who's a social psychologist who studies these things. And his response was funny, which was, I'm like, oh, it's going to be, I'm a little worried maybe. And he said, well, maybe you're just a bad conversationalist with your family, you know?
Mhm.
And I think he's right.
Yeah.
And I think maybe this is what we need to, think about is like, well, we know what makes for good conversations. You just have to use those skills and that knowledge with your family, and people are not doing it. So maybe that's the secret.
Mhm. I mean, that's really interesting. Like, can you talk about what you think is different? Like, this norm of conversationalist is really important. So, like, what's changed in how we're talking to family versus, we know not to talk about politics and religion with strangers.
Where it's
What are we
easier.
doing?
Yeah, right. One thing is when it comes, at least when I talk to people I don't know about politics, I really try to maintain a posture of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to learn about what they're thinking about. And they have things to say that I hadn't thought about before. So I gave a talk in San Francisco about the book, and I was paired with a more conservative moderator. She's from the South, she's Republican, and we were talking about taxes. And I grew up in Canada, and I think that anyone who like cares about anything, like you want higher taxes, right? So like universal healthcare, whatever. The Canadian perspective that I'm thinking about. Even though I should say I do love living in America, and I'll probably never move back. And she says, look, it's not that, me as a committed conservative, I don't care about people who are less fortunate than me or more vulnerable. I just don't trust the government to spend the money correctly. And here's all these examples of waste. And I think, that's a great point, right? There's like MK Ultra. There's like these terrible things the government have done, and not to mention just general inefficiency. And it's a very fair point. And so I can be curious because I'm going to learn something. Am I going to learn something from a family member who I know better than anyone? On some hands, you're like, it's good because you know these people. And so, you should, it should be easier. But on the other hand, like, it's the same old thing they say every time, maybe. And so am I going to learn anything? It's hard to be curious. I don't know what y'all think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. So my family, we grew up talking about almost nothing but politics and religion. But everyone, I think, did it with this curiosity in mind. So the goal wasn't to change people's minds. And that, I think, was this really interesting. And I think it's because we had very few really difficult personalities in my family. And so like there were all of these differences, but everyone was sort of like pretty respectful of each other's differences. And so it was really like, it was easier to ask those curious questions. But we did, we do have, I think everyone has like racist uncle somewhere in their like, family tree. So I have a one of those. And I just remember watching my mom just sort of react to like some like casually like racist thing he said, like a decade ago at a family meal or something. And she just sort of, like she also has very low blood pressure. And maybe we can talk about the physiological sort of response.
Yes,
like
we should talk about that.
I think there actually are some people who are like physiologically better able to have these conversations. And my mom is one of them. But she just kind of like turned it around. She was like, yeah, why do you think that? Because I've worked with, X, Y, and Z for years. I've never seen that phenomenon. Right. And so she like provided some evidence and then really asked him to explain.
Huh.
And of course he couldn't, right? Because like for him, it was like this offhanded comment. And then he's like, well, I mean, I'm just talking about like a couple people, right? Like, so he immediately was like, well, I don't have evidence for this like crappy thing that I just said, right?
Right.
But it was like, she didn't call him a bigot. She didn't, like, it really was this very like curious, and like the relationship was still important, but she also wasn't going to let him get away with it.
Yeah.
And
right.
so, it was so I think that to me was really helpful in seeing that modeled. I don't know if I have the same physiological capacity to stay cool as she does, but can you actually talk a little bit about that question of like the emotional and physiological experience of outrage? Like, what is it that makes these conversations so hard? And then like, once we've tipped over that point, like why is it so hard to get back? Yeah.
Yeah. Great question. I have a colleague named John Saroof, and I talk about him in the book, and he's an expert at having these conversations and structuring dialogue in really contentious situations, right? Communities where there's been a shooting or, protesters at each other. And he likes to say it takes a fifth of a second for your flight or fight reflex to go and 20 minutes for it to calm down, right? This is like the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And one goes so fast, you can run, you can punch, your blood gets sucked into your inner core. The trick I use is like, are your hands warm or cold? Like before a big talk, if your hands get cold, like that's your body, like pulling it into the periphery, because if you get your hand cut off, you don't want to bleed out, which is why that happens. And so this happens Thanksgiving or any of these stressful situations. And so once that happens, right, once you're like really agitated, it's really hard to have real conversations where you're curious, where you're compassionate, and where you're humble. And so, right, things you can do are practice. The more you practice, the more it helps, right? And then it's not as threatening. This is how I feel like what happens to me. I practice a bunch. Not to say that I don't get like juiced up at these talks. The other thing you can do is you just take a break,
Mhm.
and I always think, when you get married, people are like, well, here's some good advice. Never go to bed angry. Like, that's terrible advice. Maybe it comes from a priest who's like never been married, right? And they're like, and the worst time to have conversations about like really contentious issues is when you're exhausted at the end of the day,
Mhm.
right? Like, just go to bed. It won't be
Mhm.
as big a deal in the morning. So I think you can, you're maybe had a few drinks, you're feeling uncomfortable, you're getting like turkey burps. And like, there's someone who says something that ticks you off. And like, maybe right before bed is not the time to like, be like, are you racist or what? I
Yeah.
think just like call it quits, or maybe like, calm down, go for a walk, that Thanksgiving dinner walk after dinner, and then maybe try it again.
Yeah. Is there any research about the physiological piece that Lauren talked about? Because I have to say, like in my personal experience, I have really low blood pressure. It's very hard to get me excited. Now I can still be outraged for sure, but like when there's chaos, when like there's terrible stuff in the press about my organization when I was doing PR, right? Like when I'm being run away with by a horse. Um, like all these things, a canoe that is capsizing. I'm like, okay, got it. It's cool. Don't worry, everybody. And I don't think that's like my personality. I don't think that's something I achieved. I just think that's like temperament. Right. And so I'm wondering, like, do we know if there's evidence about like people's emotional, like their sort of like physiological tendency to do this stuff?
It's interesting. So I don't know about like resting baseline blood pressure, although I'm sure it's connected, but there is a ton of evidence on temperament.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even infants, right? You can class an infant as reactive or not. And that predicts a fair amount of variance in their personality, like when they're a grown, right? Like some babies are easy babies, some are chill, and maybe that changes a little bit, but like there is something, you can't tell a lot of things in babies. Like there's no like, kind of like really nuanced personality, but basically reactivity is a really big thing. So how likely is someone to react? I think a lot of our stereotypes of reactivity are kind of wrong too. So there is some evidence from the close relationships work. So John Gottman is like the father of relationship science, and there's this tendency for men in relationships to stonewall. And how he basically finds out is that, despite all the stereotypes of like men is like being really tough and like, not reactive, it's like for nature, nurture, whatever. But the couples that he studied, the men were more likely to like be uncomfortable with physiological like activation. And that's why they don't want to talk about it, right? It's just so aversive that they're like, no, I'm going out to the bar or whatever, I'm leaving, these kind of tropes because of this physiological reactivity, right? Maybe they're not sitting with it, they're not used to it, but it's a real thing. So you're right.
Okay, so it's a lot more complicated, I think, is the answer, because you can respond to it, you cannot respond to it. You can kind of like white knuckle your way through Thanksgiving dinner, but that doesn't say anything about the underlying emotions, just whether you act on them or not.
Yeah, but I think you're right? Like, what if the way to solve Thanksgiving was just everyone takes beta blockers, or just like benzo, like here's your Valium, we're gonna pass it around, like Uncle Jesse, take your Valium, and then we're all just like, we're just chill, it's cool.
I mean, Kurt would never tell you to put pot in the brownies, but maybe he should.
So the comment about infants kind of cracked me up, because I actually had not put this into context with with your book, but my middle daughter is what you would call reactive and has been since she was an infant. I mean, like you could see her like very inflexible. She never took a bottle. And so like she was fed by my husband with a syringe, and he would wait till she stopped screaming and she took a breath, and then he would squirt it into her mouth, and then she would swallow, and then she would start screaming again. But like this went on for months. Like people were like, oh, she'll come around. And he's like, no, this child would rather starve to death than take a bottle.
And so like, and now we see that inflexibility and like the sort of reactivity, like, to in like a variety of other contexts. But I'm wondering, and so one of the things that our challenges as parents is and we've been doing like a lot of like cognitive behavioral therapy work with her and stuff like that, just to like, and she's super bright, but this like, it's a combination of like black and white thinking and like inflexibility as well as reactivity to like, like, things that are outside of her like boxes,
Right. The predictive model, like violations of the predictive model. And you just go, no. Yeah.
she does not like those. So one of the things that I like about your work is sort of like helping us sort of, and we talk a lot about parenting on this podcast. So, I mean, I think there's kind of like two questions for Thanksgiving. Like, first of all, like one, as parents, like what are kinds of things that we can sort of like skills and things that we can help teach our kids to manage these kinds of, our own internal reactivity and our own outrage. But then also like, if adults aren't doing this well, then like there's also stuff that we should be doing with adults too. So I don't know if you have thoughts on like all of that, but it's funny that you like, I was thinking immediately of my middle when you were like, yeah, as infants, you can see it.
Yeah.
And so some people might need more help than others, I guess that's part. Yeah.
You bet. And, my eldest also has big feelings, I like to say. And, she's on, we put her on like Strattera, which has actually been pretty amazing.
What is that?
It's like an ADHD medication, but it's like a selective norepinephrine re-inhibitor. Reuptake inhibitor, whatever. But it's like, it was a real pain for her to get used to it. But it has been massively helpful for her reactivity. And I think it inserts what I like to call as like the pause. And I think I'll get to the pause also in conversation. So the pause is like something happens and it makes you angry. And it just gives you like a half a second even just to be like chill a bit. And like, maybe this person didn't mean it, because the cognitions, when you're feeling bad, like you have these cognitions, like my sister meant to piss me off, she's intending to hurt me. And then it's like, wow, the cognition fuses to the anger. And then it's like retribution, retaliation. And it's crazy. And so, it inserts a pause there, but I think this pause is super useful too, when it comes to dealing with anyone with big feelings, because you need to separate the validity of the feeling from the kind of counter argument or the guardrail or the persuasion, right? So this is super important with kids, but maybe also, your uncle who's racist with your mom, right? So there's a feeling.
Sorry, Uncle Ron.
Yeah, that's right. There's a feeling, and you need to say the feelings are real. Like I think of Frozen, you feel what you feel and those feelings are real. And so you need to validate them. But then but then, right, the tendency is always just say like, yeah, but, so someone explains it. Yeah, you feel that way. But here's the thing, Uncle Ross, and I think maybe not with racism, but with certainly people with big feelings, be like, well, I just get so upset about this thing and like immigrants or whatever. And like, I'm afraid they're going to, come to my city. And so I think you need to be like, I totally understand. It's important to want to protect your communities and your family. And I understand you're feeling that way. And that's a valid feel.
Yeah.
And then pause. Like you can even just count yourself. It's 3, like 1, 2, 3. My perspective might differ a little bit, and I feel threats in a different way. But that pause is so important for having these good conversations, because it separates the validation from the counter argument, and that makes them separate things. It's not like a backhanded validation. It's a real validation. And then you can do something else. With kids too, right? Like my daughter's like raging at her sister. I'm like, I understand. She made you really angry, and that was not cool what she did.
Yeah.
Is it acceptable to hit? Like there's a pause there.
It's funny though, like even kids, you cannot get a fake validation by even children. Like they know when there's a but behind it. And like you don't feel heard, right? And I think that's part of why the family conversations are so like, they're like bombs, right? It's like, I don't know, it's what is the thing that they blow up minds with, that not dynamite, anyway, the thing that would be in the movies, and it's like it's explosive, and like you shake it too hard, it blows up. I think it is
Yeah.
dynamite, isn't it? Dynamite, TNT, like what?
Or they have those big machines with rotating chains. Like imagine just driving those into Thanksgiving, metaphorically speaking. They just
Well,
like
that is
shake,
what we're doing.
boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
boom.
But it's like something so fragile, right? And the reason it's so fragile, the reason it's so explosive and reactive is because there's years of these, of feeling unheard in a lot of cases. Because like whose family is really doing a good job of having people feel heard and respected, right? Like families aren't great at that. Maybe we're learning more to do that now. But, after years of doing that, I think it's just really tempting to shut everybody up with like, yeah, I know you feel that way, but, and
Yeah.
of course we're frustrated by it. And it doesn't work. And so I love this idea of the pause. You could drink some wine, you could have some more pie.
Totally.
Mhm.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So
hard. I mean, especially generationally too, right? Like if some
Mhm.
like parent doesn't feel heard by their parent and they're giving it to you, right?
Yeah.
They're like, they have a model. This is how it is. And so it's much harder to change your model of what families are than how to have a conversation with a stranger.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So I think my poor uncle, I think the the racist uncle though leads to this good question though, which is outrage always a bad thing, right? Like there
Mhm.
have to be situations, right? And so I think the question is, are there times when it sort of signals something meaningful? And then how do we tell the difference between legitimate moral anger and sort of just like reactive outrage or just like, inflexibility or whatever the sort of less acceptable version of outrage would be?
Yeah. There's definitely legitimate outrage. Actually, I do want to make maybe one point about like with, to Laura's previous point about how hard it is with family. I was just thinking of like when I tried to, this is a different context. We were playing a board game, also landmine.
Mhm.
And I tried to rise above the conflict that I used my professor voice with my family. I'm just like, well, let's think about it in context. And like, these rules don't really make sense if you think about these other rules. And so like, if you just think of it as like a system that's interacting, and that was worse, like if I was
Yeah.
a petulant child and I'm like, oh, you guys aren't listening to me. And like, oh, like that would be okay. But I'm like, no. I just think you fail to understand the nuances of these, like, of this situation. And now like, that was really angering.
People love that.
They were,
Yeah.
because you're dismissive, do you think, or because you like stepped outside of your role?
I think I stepped outside of my role and I challenged in a way that was like not like I wasn't challenging in a way like, oh, it's not fair, like a kid way. I like became all of a sudden like the parent figure. And I think
Yeah.
that revolt was just like that reversal was just unwelcome.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we don't play board games anymore, even like to this
That's
day.
probably
'Cause
smart.
I know, right? Yeah. Damn PhDs.
You can't do anything with those people.
I know, right? You can't even like be nice. No, but to the question of outrage, which is a great question. It's totally legitimate to feel outrage, and it evolved for a good reason, which is that when we see injustice, we get angry, and then we get other people to get along, to be like get our pitchforks and our torches, and we like march and we like fix that threat that's threatening our community. Like if someone's really evil in our midst, then we kick them out of our group. And of course, the outrage that we feel is not always well placed, or it's like can be biased. Like the Scarlet Letter, is that really fair? Frankenstein's monster, is that really fair? Right. But it comes from a good place, at least a functional place when it comes to evolution. But the problem is now that there's not a lot of like really, let me just correct what's like, there is a lot of bad things in the world that are legitimately bad. But when you're coming to Thanksgiving, most of us aren't like in our midst, like, you're not like, oh, Uncle Ross is a murderer. We should get mad
Right.
because like last Thanksgiving, he like murdered my cousin. We should all like, right, that's bad. We'll kick out Uncle Ross. He's not invited for a pie. Sorry, Uncle Ross. But now we're like disagreeing about like which news sources are the most truthful
Mhm.
or like what, policies at the border that don't really affect people. And so when it's kind of at an arm's length, it's easier to become more outraged because we're generally more safe, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well-
So this actually goes to
a question that I've sort of been bouncing back and forth, which is a lot of progressive friends of mine, have mentioned that they, simply can't talk to specific family members or, don't want to have these conversations. What they're doing is making an argument about harm in a lot of these situations, right? So like this person's opinion is harming people, right? And so I wonder if there's also like a sort of disconnect between like people's opinions obviously do have downstream impacts on policy and things like that, but there's also like a need to separate, for example. And this is one thing I've been trying to do in my own work is like, there's a difference between like the people who voted for Trump for like a variety of complex reasons that have to do with everything from like the economy to like housing in their area to like whatever else, right? And like ICE agents in the street. But a lot of people that I talk to see those things as like like your vote made that happen, right? And
Right.
so they do see the connection, like they do see like a real harm. And so to them it is like a justifiable, like, no, you're a terrible person, right? So do you see like the way that we talk about politics and like the way that we think about like sort of the direct connections between like people's votes and policy? I mean, is that playing into like, and just, I think generally more expansive definitions of harm playing into like how outrage kind of gets fueled?
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. So, I argue in the book and in my work more generally, right, that these like perceptions of harm really drive our moral condemnation, right? So if we see something harmful, then we condemn it. But it's not just any harm, like it's not a car accident, right? It's intentional harm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the funny thing about how we understand intention is that it's tied to victimization and suffering, right? They're not in a vacuum. And so if, you could think about in the law, if someone slips on a sidewalk that hasn't been shoveled, it's icy, right? And people fall down. People don't think that it's someone who is super busy and they just didn't get around to shoveling. They're like, that person was intentionally negligent, right? And wanted me to suffer. And of course, maybe we're like, oh yeah, with shoveling your walk, it's not a big deal. But with like voting, there is a causal connection, right? It takes votes to get elected. And so I think it's not just that you infer that this person facilitated this or allowed it, that they wanted this, right? So like there's an intentionality behind it, right? Like you wanted these people to get deported, you monster. And so I think that's what really needs to separate, right? Like, but if you understand that the intention behind their vote was to afford things at the pump, to buy groceries, because they were afraid about whatever, too much outsource, whatever, right? But I think it's that intentionality that's really key.
Yeah. I think part of what we're missing, because I feel like, a lot of the conversation we're having right now about polarization and outrage sort of like assumes intentionality by all these people. And of course that is the one of the key biases of human perception, right? Is that like we see everything as intentional. But one of the things that's kind of, to me, like a missed point in those conversations is that we're assuming all of those things are in people's conscious control when they're not. And I wonder how much we could make a difference by just kind of getting people to make that pause and be like, your understanding of them as intentional is in the professor voice, understandable, but incorrect.
Yeah,
right? Like,
right.
how do we get people to be more aware of the fact that like intentionality is kind of a bias and that's just pouring gasoline on this entire business, right? Like it's probably not intentional.
Yeah. Road rage too, right? I think this all the time. Like when you cut someone off, it's because you're in a hurry and you're not, you're not thinking, you're not paying attention. But if someone cuts you off, like that son of a bitch, they did it on purpose and they hate you and everything you stand for, right? That's how you get road rage. And it, I had an episode of road rage when I was a kid, and like this person came out of their car, not the one in the book. I do start the book with like a real episode of road rage.
More
but
than
another
one.
one. Pardon?
You had more than one of these?
I have more than one. Yeah.
Wow.
You can tell I was not a careful driver.
This
And
maybe it's me search. Have you
yeah,
thought about that?
totally,
It's not research. It's not research at all.
road
Okay,
raged, like
road
Kurt
rage.
Gray.
It's the next book.
Um, but this guy got out of his car and he was like, basically I'm going to fuck you up. And I was like, oh, hey, sorry back there. I wasn't paying attention. And, I really apologize. And we didn't spin out and squeal like I did in the first one. There wasn't that much harm. But he was like, oh, okay. He got back in his car. I was like, I didn't, I should have been paying attention. I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry. It wasn't intentional. And he was like, yeah, you should have been paying attention. But yeah, I should have. Okay. So people do assume that. I mean, I think, one way to do it in conversations is just to be like, look, setting ground rules, right? Like, I know we're going to say things that are going to be offensive to either one of us. And that's just how it is because we're, I'm pulling talking points from the cable news or social media. And so I think this idea of grace, and I talk a lot with church audiences, is really important, right? Like, I'm just going to have some grace to know that we both mean the best. We both love each other. I mean, in family, you can even do this explicitly, right?
Yeah.
We both love each other, and it's weird to say, but we do. And I just want to understand where you're coming from. And so could we just leave the vitriol from cable news and social media behind and just try to get at each other, right? Like, it seems so awkward to say that and in a conversation, but I think those kind of ground rules are saying we're coming from a place of charity and goodness is good.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense too, though. I mean, I like that idea of kind of deliberately setting what the intention is at the start and sort of refreshing and everybody, I don't know, laying a ground rule of what intention is for this gathering, right? We love each other. We're not here to upset each other.
Right. And beginnings are so important. We know this from the, literature on teams and organizations and business, right? When you kick off something, you set the tone, you set the intention. And we also know, right, that communicating what your intent explicitly is really important. And so just take a time to do that.
Yeah. The communication thing I think is interesting because it should be an area that we are better off with family than we are with strangers because we have this opportunity, right? We're close to our family, we have a background with them. But I think to Laura's point, we're actually often not we often have these patterns of communication in families that do not facilitate communication and do not communicate sort of clear communication. But this is a tiny anecdote. I don't know if any of your kids watch Mark Rober. He's he was a former NASA engineer who now does all of this really fun kid engineering stuff. Anyway, he's great. Look him up on YouTube. But he has a really great YouTube. So he likes solving these kind of mundane problems. But one of them I thought was genius, which is it's really dumb that we only have one horn on cars. And it's an angry horn, right? So you if something happens, you're even when you're beep, beep, it's still loud and kind of and so he actually engineered his car to have a second horn that was a friendlier horn. And of course it it does something really ludicrous, it's or something, some really weird noise. And of course it's mildly emasculating. But his whole point was, I think, a really interesting one, right? Which is that there's a certain amount of social engineering, right? And road rage is a perfect example of this. You have a really limited ability to communicate with people in other cars. It's really hard to determine their intentions. It's hard to know, did that asshole cut me off because he's a terrible human being? Or are they lost in the city and their GPS is cutting out and they're desperately trying to get off the exit before they get stuck for the next 15 miles, right? There's really different intentions there. And so I love the goofy horn, but I kind of think that if we think about social interactions in that sense of how can we engineer these? And that's why I love your idea of that pause, right? Are there ways that we can just create kind of decision rules or just tweak the background structure of these conversations to make them less likely to go off the rails? And so maybe we all need to think more about what little horns we can add to to our communication toolbox.
Yeah. I mean, another default that I think is powerful is just to ask questions if in doubt and clarification questions. Because if you're not quite sure what to say, you could just be oh, interesting. Could you tell me more? Even just that question. And now people feel oh, you're listening. I feel heard, right? And we all want to be heard. And so it's a good default. And the best, I was just at lunch with someone and he basically talked at me for an hour. Uh, and I didn't feel like a thoughtful guy, but it wasn't like a super useful meeting because I just got lectured. And
Mhm.
so if it turns into like who's lecturing whom, that's the wrong idea for the conversation, right? It should be like, how can I learn from you and ask questions?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and then there's also like just dynamics, right? Like if you have parents, they've parented you, and for them to switch the model that they're operating under, I think is for most parents really difficult. And they're not, the idea of learning from your kid, I think, especially for all of our parents' generation, is just kind of like, that's very foreign. Like,
Yeah.
why would you listen to stuff your kid has to say, even if they do have a PhD?
Yeah,
What would they know?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Um, well, can you talk a little bit more, like going back to the question of parenting, as somebody who studies moral emotions, maybe like, broadening from the idea of outrage, but as somebody who studies moral emotions, like, do you think does that work change your parenting, or has your parenting experience like changed how you think about your research?
I think my research has definitely shaped how I parent.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe the other way too. I wrote this like article way back when my toddler was not sleeping. And again, to the reactive kid, everyone's like, "Oh, you just need to cry it out." Like it was,
Hmm.
I had my kid cried out for a night. It was like so hard for me, but like that night was tough. But now they sleep forever. Like,
Hmm.
well, my kid would hyperventilate from crying too much, and then I went in and she was already hyperventilating, and like that wouldn't even help. And so like, it's not a thing, right? It's not a
Yeah.
thing. Um, and so I wrote this article, basically like this like Buddhist perspective on parenting, which is like I'm a bamboo in the wind, and like I try to just like sublimate myself entirely, and like I have no self, and I just let like the streams wash over me, and like live in the now and be like, this is what a parent is. Um, and so I tried to find enlightenment in suffering, um, and so like the kind of, I don't know, weakening of the self, I think, is really important in kind of political conversations. Um,
Mhm.
not of like giving up my convictions, but just that I'm trying to like relinquish like the habits that I have, the kind of reflexes that I have of anger, and just the fact that like I'm not my political views
Mhm.
in that like they don't constitute my soul in a
Mhm.
deep sense, you know. And even if I feel deeply about it, that's fine. But like they're not me, and so I try to like take that perspective in conversations. And then from conversations, I learn to like validate more and ask questions of my kids. So my kid says something, I'm not just like, oh, like, how are you so shitty at this? Right. Like, like with your sister, I obviously wouldn't say that. Like, tell me where you're coming from. Oh, like, tell me the context. Oh, that makes sense from kind of where you're coming from. But is it okay to hit? Like it always
Mhm.
basically ends with
Yeah.
that. But I think they
Yeah.
do reinforce each other, right? The relinquishing of the self a little
Mhm.
bit, especially.
Well,
That's so
so
interesting. Yeah. Go
I'm
ahead.
also a university administrator, and so there's like a lot of hilarious sort of crossovers with parenting, oddly enough. But people are angry at me a lot, and uh, and now that I've been in this role for like 3.5 years, I mean, there is this like freedom in just being able to say this isn't about me, right?
Mhm.
This is about broader anxiety about the future of higher education. This is about like questions of control and agency and like how people feel about their like how the landscape of their job has changed or how it will change, right? And so I have a job to do, which is help people sort of navigate, like help, you know, navigate trade-offs and help people sort of understand the broader background constraints. But it has been really freeing to just take myself out of it. Like this is not about me, right? Like, like if
Mhm.
people send me mean emails, I'm just like, this is just it's fine, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that has helped me because the last thing I can afford to do is escalate. Like I have to de-escalate, right? Because I just can't. First of all, it's like not good for my mental health if I like if every angry
Yeah.
email that someone sent me, I'm just escalating. Like
You're right, Matt. You're like, sounds like you're a shitty
dialing.
faculty member.
I, I would have like an aneurysm, like within a day or two. But so I think it's healthy for me to de-escalate, but it's also just like that's what you need to do when like people have lots of reasons for the reasons that they're upset. But 99% of the time, it's not about you as an individual, right? And same thing with parenting, like when my toddler's freaking out and screaming at the top of their lungs, it was really helpful to me to remember, like, I mean, I blamed like almost everything on growth spurts, and it was like really freeing. I was like, oh, their brain is going through a developmental leap, and therefore they're incapable of using their prefrontal cortex for the next 2 weeks. But like being able to like explain it, even if that's not what was going on, it made me like just feel better about the whole like situation. But yeah, I like that idea of just like you can just sort of let go, right?
And in modern society, we're like super clustered with politics, right? It's like become the super identity because we're not, we're bowling alone. We don't belong to these interest groups, whatever, right? We're like, oh, I'm a red, I'm a blue. But like, is it really about you? Like which billionaire or multimillionaire is in power, like pulling the levers? I mean, at the end of the day, you're still probably not going to get any more or less as a person. And maybe you will, and you can get upset at their policies, but like, just because your uncle wears a red hat or a Harris pin or something, it's like not about you, and it's not even about them, right? Like just let it wash over you a little bit more.
I think that so much of this is really, it goes back to your idea of the self, Kurt. And it's like so much of the stuff that we're doing is meant to either protect the self or like kind of like reinforce the self. And so I feel like, for people who don't feel like they have a lot of agency in their lives, like knowing that you can make people really upset and you can get like this really powerful reaction from people with the right color of hat. I think that they're like, I like this. This is good. And so, yeah, it's like it's a really dangerous thing, I think, because I feel like kind of what both of you are touching on is this idea of like the self doesn't actually need protecting. Like we just think it does. And if you can kind of like let down the defenses to be like, yeah, this is a screaming child, I'm going to let it wash out over me, right? Like this is a racist uncle, just nothing to do with me. We would all be much happier and peaceful, and
the self will be better in the long run, right? Like your uncle would be kinder to you. Your kid would like calm down probably faster because you're not like torquing them up with your anger, right? Like no one ever meets someone who's a little less selfish and thinks like, oh, like I didn't like that more, Like it's just better to be more selfless in general.
So one thing we haven't, I think we've like skirted around the edges of it, but I know that this is something like Laura and I focus on a lot. And I know Laura thinks about a lot, which is like sort of the effects of tribalism and sort of how tribalism impacts outrage. And so, one of the things that we know has been growing is affective polarization. And so it's not just that we disagree politically, it's that we actually are now, the sort of distance between the other side is now deeply emotional. And this adds to this question of harm that we brought up earlier, right? Which is that now an increasing number of Americans believe that the people who believe things differently from them are actual dangers, right? They're dangers to their group. And so we've activated this in-group, out-group element. And so I don't know if you have thoughts like generally on sort of like these like deeper sort of human instincts that we can trigger in terms of like tribalism and in-group, out-group, and how that relates to this broader question of outrage and how we can defang it.
Yeah. I mean, I read in the book about kind of like what's the genesis of morality, and it's kind of group living, right? We need morality to protect us within these groups so our neighbor doesn't murder us. But there's also outside groups that are a threat to us as well, right? Different tribes. I mean, I think of like in the Old Testament, there is a story about Shibboleth. It's like classic story. Like there's one tribe that says Shibboleth and one tribe says Shibboleth, and they're basically like very similar. And yet based on that, when someone swims over the River Jordan, you ask them to say Shibboleth, and if they say it wrong, you murder them. And something like tens of thousands of people were murdered that day. And, it doesn't take much to see like a thread of that in modern times in how we're kind of like thinking about our groups. And so it's a very human urge, but especially when we're threatened by resources, or the perceived lack of resources, right? Like there's only one party in power. There's only so much gas to go around. There's only so many groceries, so much money, so many jobs, immigrants, whatever. And so it's easy to feel that way. And and I think maybe one solution for it is to like zoom out again, you know, and think about like, well, how bad is it really? So there's all these like democracy experts that say like America, it's bad. It's like,
Mhm.
it's one of the worst countries. And then, but that like listen, includes like countries where it's like really bad. So like Bosnia or like, like African countries where it's like literal anarchy in some towns, right? And so it's actually not that bad at the local level, at the state level, even the federal level, is not that bad in a relative sense. So like that can help like reduce some of the stress um, a little bit. I think another thing to keep in mind is that the other side doesn't hate you as much as you think. And that
Mhm.
reciprocity goes a long way, right? Like if you run into someone at the party and someone tells you like, you know what, that person, they hate you, right? They think you're terrible. And then you're
Yeah.
going to meet them and you're like, who? Yeah. All right. Who are you, ugly? Like, and your shoes are dumb. And like, I hate your like choice of appetizer, whatever, right? Like you're going to go in there like trying to piss them off. But if you're just like, yeah, this person's like trying to figure out, they just moved to the area, you're not going to have the same aggressive feeling, right?
Mhm.
So I think if we go into interactions with this wrong understanding, like this person hates me, maybe they're like, doesn't like your party, but like, they don't know you, they don't hate you. And so again, like just like separating yourself from this like bias is really, I think, important.
Yeah. I mean, it is this, I think the idea of like this monolithic left or monolithic right is another example of like, this is very motivated perception, right? This is like prototypical outgroup thinking. So that they're all interchangeable. They all think the same way. They're all opposed to you and a threat to you. And I wonder how much further we could just get by sort of like my kids are now getting like socio emotional instruction in school, right? Like, what if we were just like, hey, you know what? When it seems like everybody is the same and they hate you, that's not true. That's your brain. That's a thing your brain does sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
so
there's so much
telling.
diversity, right? Like in what
Right.
people believe. And if people feel safe enough, they'll tell you about their own,
Hmm.
like I think about, talk about abortion and you have to like be this camp and you're like, no, I'm pro-life or I'm pro-choice. But like most pro-lifers are like,
Hmm.
well, if, someone's sexually assaulted or the mother's life's at risk, and most pro-choicers aren't like, well, third trimester, like, let's do it.
Hmm.
And so, and even if people, feel one way or the other, they still feel discomfort
Hmm.
about these trade-offs, right? And so I think if you can let people, and this is one thing I study, right? Like how people perceive the minds of others, you think something's intentional if it's bad, and
Hmm.
you think that people are not conflicted. But there's a
Hmm.
lot of, being dean of faculty, I'm sure, right? You're like, I'm pretty conflicted on what to do here because there's good points on both sides. At the
Hmm.
end of the day, we have to do this, right? I'm pretty conflicted about abortion. We have to attack whatever. There's so many conflicts in our minds that we don't convey and we can't.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you think, I do want to get us to some of the like practical tips for surviving the holiday. We've already given a couple, but in a broader sense, and this just came up in a conversation I was having with some other political scientists earlier this week. I mean, do you think that social scientists have some responsibility for this? I mean, I'm thinking about like the way that we often like frame polling data or like the way that we like talk about, public opinion, right? And very often it is put in these sort of like binary terms, right? Like, so like, you know, people who are pro-choice versus people who are pro-life. But then if you actually dig into people's actual beliefs about abortion, they're actually all clustered in the middle. Like people will call it
Totally.
different things, right? But like people's beliefs about like when you should probably start limiting abortion tends to be very similar, like across the American, public. So I almost feel like some of this stuff is like very artificial, but like I think as academics, we actually do contribute to it in some ways because of the way that we frame a lot of these political conversations and a lot of the conflicts that we're trying to study them. And so you do have to like, you have to categorize things. You have to, at some point, draw lines. But I think it does, in some cases, obscure a lot of the pluralism and diversity, but then also obscures a lot of like agreement. Like
Mhm.
people actually agree on a lot of stuff.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot of blame that rests with political scientists and none with social psychologists.
That's what
We
I,
can all
oh, right.
we can all agree the economists are the worst. Yeah.
Cosign.
100%.
No, just kidding. Just kidding.
And the business school people are the absolute worst because they're sowing division and making more money than all the rest of us.
And make so much more than we do. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, you do have to categorize things to study it, but I also think that the real problem is not academics, but the elites who try to, divide people so they can like gin up kind of money or votes or outrage online. So I think we're all, in some sense, a victim of like this elite narrative and the structure of American politics. There's like red, blue, whatever. But I think we could be more, like dialectical, like more Eastern about it. We don't have to like separate things into dualities, but it's pretty hard not to. And I don't want to take the blame as an academic. We're doing our best. We're trying to reveal similarities. Come on, guys. Like, let us help you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a really, I think there's so much to say there, just about using data, misusing data. And I don't think academics really are the ones who are at fault here, because if anything, academics go the complete opposite direction, right? And like, look at things this close, right? And then they're like, well, let me tell you about how this works. And right, like it's too disjointed from normal conversation. The problem is like, then we have media, taking polling data that says something convenient, but actually not very enlightening. And we end up with kind of a dumb conversation. And I say all the time, like, if you want to have a really stupid conversation about public policy, talk to political partisans, because like this is the dumbest possible version of every single conversation that we're having. Whether it's immigration reform, abortion, whatever, like this is a really dumb way to do it. Right. Because you're going to take a shitty idea, counter it with another shitty idea, and just like, argue and be outraged. Right. So like, I'm for independence, and nonpartisans are the answer to everything. Maybe have a nonpartisan Thanksgiving. But yeah, Kurt, like give us, before we wrap up here, because I know we don't have a ton of time left, like what are some strategies besides the pause at Thanksgiving? Like pause, we talked about setting an intention. Like what else would you advise people?
Yeah. And I mean, in the book and from the work I've done with Essential Partners, kind of recommend, the CIV framework, which is maybe useful for folks to take away the beginning of civil conversations. And it's stuff we talked about already, but it kind of makes it a little more concrete. So the connect is start talking to people as if they're people before you talk about politics. Connect with them as human beings. There's so many things that we care about, kids or food or hobbies, or TV and movies, music, whatever. Like start there and ask questions. I think in particular is a really powerful way to connect. And we vastly underestimate how much people like being asked questions, especially deep questions. This is Nick Epley's work, right? But like, if you randomly assign people on the train to ask people like, hey, when's the last time you cried in front of another person? How do you think you're going to die one day? People like, are you insane? Like that's super sketchy. But if you preface it with like, well, I'm just trying to like get to know people better. I'm part of the study, whatever. But you can preface it however you want. But like getting those questions, like, what are you most excited about? I ran into a colleague on the way to colloquium the other day. And instead of asking like, how you doing? I asked him, are you feeling fully self-actualized in this moment? And obviously the answer is no, because none of us do. But he felt licensed to be like, well, here's actually what I'm worried about. And here's what I'm hoping about, And so like these kind of like, you flip the script a little bit. So you connect with people, know what they're doing. And then you invite people to share their opinion. And this is where you're like setting the intention, right? Like, I'm trying to understand, what you're thinking about with this. Maybe you don't have to tell me right now. Maybe wait till pie's over. I'd love to hear, aside from the talking points, kind of what you're thinking about when it comes to immigration. And maybe it's contentious, right? But like, I got an email from someone after the book was published and say like, look, this invitation, the I part doesn't work. I tried, it doesn't work. I said, well, could you tell me what you did, to invite? And she's like, yeah, I was hanging with this guy in Australia and he voted for a different party. And, this different party like has these policies that are like, inciting genocide. And so I said, well, how can you vote for this party that incites genocide? Explain it to me.
That's a real invitation.
Yeah, right. That's an invitation. So the invitation really needs to focus on understanding and helping you understand. So there's curiosity baked in there, and just kind of like a really desire for connection as well. And then when someone tells you, and they're worried about being attacked in return because we're vigilant to these threats, then I think the validation comes in. This is where the pause comes in. Right. Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate you sharing, Laura. I know, Laura, that you're not really into partisans, and I think that's really important. And so, I don't agree with everything you said, but I think that's a really valid perspective, and it's kind of great for sharing it because we're in such a contentious time.
Yeah. That's really,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I mean, if you can like genuinely, I think, express something positive, I think that's hard and it takes practice.
Right.
It doesn't come to us naturally. And there actually is something quite a bit, I think, like parenting in that, right?
Yeah.
Like being able, because when you're parenting, you're not actually 95% of the time talking about a kid who's hitting it out of the ballpark, right? Like I always talk about at the dinner table how, like, if I want to encourage better manners, then I end up saying things like, I really like how you didn't get your hair in your food today. Right. And it's like,
Yeah.
I would love to have like drill sergeant dinner table where I just like scream about people's manners, but like that doesn't work. Right. And
Yeah.
so it has to be this like validation of thank you for using a napkin. Thank you for asking your brother to pass that. And I know it's so much more satisfying to kind of like point out people's failings, but it's like you have to be able to genuinely validate what is a good part. And I think we all have to like work at that.
Absolutely right. Find the
Yeah.
right. Like I can appreciate how you're motivated, like to protect the country and not like, America needs more people like you, who are really, but at the same time, and I literally had this conversation in an Uber, like you can't call people who disagree with you Nazis. That's just not acceptable. So you can start the ground rules, but you need to do it after you like praise and make people feel comfortable. And yeah, it's a great analogy. Yeah.
I think some of this too, like it's really important because like the miscommunication risk is so high right now because I think people are prejudging each other's sort of like intentions. I think about this a lot because, the question of like where you're from can be loaded so heavily in one direction or another. And I know like for a while, like we weren't allowed to ask where people were from because like, it was like a microaggression, but I love asking people where they're from because I've traveled a lot and I love talking to people about like their, like where they're like, anyway, it's a great opener, but I think you do have to like think about how your question might be misinterpreted and provide people some background so that they feel safe. Right. So it's like, I'm connecting with you, but I'm connecting with you for this particular reason. Right. Like,
right.
I heard you speaking Spanish, like, and it sounds South American. Like, where are you from? I was in Peru a couple of years ago. Like, so you give them safety so that they know that you're not going to keep whacking at them with something else. And then the same, like for the invite, like I love that example that you gave because it's like, I also think people should think about and like clearly indicate to themselves, like, am I inviting someone to a cage match or am I inviting someone to a conversation? Like there's a big difference. And like, you have to be kind of clear in your own head, like which one you're doing, because otherwise no one's going to engage, right? Like, why would you?
Right. And if you're trying to win, I say you've already lost. Like this is what tip out, right? Because like, if you're like, I'm going to convince them they're wrong, but they're coming to with the same motivation, right? And no one's ever like, holy shit, that, you said it so smart that I'm going to give it my view on abortion and immigration, right? Like, wow, you nailed it with that factoid from Fox News or NPR, And so if you're not expecting to change your beliefs, then like, why should you expect someone else to?
Yep. And the research is really clear that backfires, right? Like using facts to confront somebody with why their views on politics and religion, especially, are wrong. Like there's very clear lab evidence that makes people double down on the original view. So you are only making it worse if you are coming at somebody with counter facts.
That's right.
Yep. Well, we are almost out of time. Kurt, we like to ask people what they're feeling optimistic about right now. And I don't know. It feels, I actually have some, yeah, it could be very hard to come up with something optimistic, but I'll let you decide. Like what, so anyway, what are you feeling optimistic about going into Thanksgiving? It could be a big picture or small picture optimism.
I feel optimistic about one-on-one interactions all the time. I was just, when I was at, Chicago giving this talk, someone was, I was talking with someone who, who's in like the deep canvassing world. And these are people, let's say someone who's like trans and they go around to communities and knock on doors and introduce themselves to, really, let's say red communities and like, look, I'm like an advocate of trans rights, I'm a trans person, and have those conversations. And those conversations always go well. Always go well because people, when you actually are confronted with other people, we treat them like people.
Yep.
And so, there's like all sorts of division in social media and at the national level, but I'm always buoyed by just thinking that like when people talk to each other one-on-one and you give someone the benefit of the doubt, you just like talk to them, be like, hey, nice sneakers. Or like I was walking on campus and someone had, this like a Delta badges. You're in the airport. He had like the 3 million mile badge. And I was like, you flew 3 million miles? Wow. Like, and he's like, yeah, I mean, he's like, it's just about being old, it was like a good joke, but like, I kind of validated like him and, he made a joke. We had this little micro connection. And so I'm optimistic about our ability to have conversations, even if like the national landscape is divided.
Yeah, so true. We say that on the podcast all the time, like we evolved for face-to-face interaction, to understand people and coordinate our behavior with theirs through face-to-face interaction. And I think it started to feel really hard, but it's actually very, we're already have all the skills we need for it. And it really, like you're saying, like it's always kind of the source of like challenge and delight when you talk to somebody. And I've met so many people that I'm just like, that's crazy, right? Like you did X and Y, like that's what? I would have never expected that. And that's where the delight comes from, right? It's like somebody will tell you something you've never thought before. And like, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Kurt, tell us where people can find you. We're going to obviously have all of this information in the show notes. We'll have your book. I don't have my copy with me because I'm stuck in the airport, but Laura can hold hers up. Read the book. But yeah, tell us where people can find you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Great. I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a Substack. We're on Substack right now. I have a Substack Moral Understanding newsletter, I think it's called, but a Moral Understanding Substack. And the book has a website. You can download some free things and learn about it too. So just Google me, you'll find some stuff, but subscribe to the Substack and you'll get some lessons semi-regularly.
Awesome. Well, we will have links to that, and we're going to have this uploaded in time, edited and uploaded in time for everyone's Thanksgiving. So everyone can listen and then go to your website and download all the stuff and buy your book so that they are absolutely ready to use the CIV framework for Thanksgiving connection.
Yeah.
You know what? There's a turkey hotline. I think maybe there should be like a Kurt hotline, an outraged hotline. So we could call you on Thanksgiving and be like, do you know what they said? And you could be like, I'd like you to pause. It could just be a recording of you being like, you can pause right now. Yeah. Yourself is fine.
Yeah, right. That's right. You are not
it's
your
washing
political
over
beliefs.
you.
That's right. You are bamboo in the wind.
I think you should do that. Awesome. All right. Well, on that note, everybody, so thank you, Kurt. Thanks everyone who joined us, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I see you all. Happy turkey.
You've been listening to We Made This Political with Laura Forcum and Lauren Hall. You can find us on Substack, Instagram, or LinkedIn. The podcast Substack is We Made This Political. Laura's Substack is How to Human, and Lauren's Substack is The Radical Moderate's Guide to Life. Subscribe and share if you like what you hear, and please also rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. That really, really helps other people find our work and means a lot to us too. Thanks for listening.